Okay, welcome back. It is June 18 of 2015. After 104 pages of these lectures on phenomenology, we are ready to take a composite summary look at Brentano's position on descriptive psychology, which is his term for phenomenology. So we're going to get a better look this time. We're going to give a little bit of a summary and then take up his next point of interest. So we will begin with his, what he calls a 5-point summary up through page 104. And we begin with the first point that psychognosy as phenomenology proceeds through the identification of the individualized components of perception and then an enumeration of a structural ordering between these perceptions. And then we deduce doctrine based on the positing of this model at the dialogue threshold. Now, from the objective encounter, we internalize a psychical internal representation, and this is accompanied by a pre-reflexive moment of kind of a proto-self-consciousness that unifies the percept representation. Percepts for our psychical unified representation are gathered through noticing, according to Brentano, and then we store them in a loosely connected network within mechanical memory. Now, our next step, we arrange the lexical network of percepts in order to form a sign model for positing at the dialogue threshold. It's a first positing of the truth of signification as our very first linguistic insight. Now, the reciprocal discourse of refinement at the dialogue threshold passes through the first two pervading modalities of what he said were the fundamental sensations, and then the superimposed meaning and belief that is imprinted on that first level fundamental sensations. So refinement proceeds through reflective reasoning at the dialogue threshold, and the individual's Protoraices stance is taken into consideration. Now here's the question: what exactly is this Protoraices that Brentano refers to? What does Protoraices lead to? What is he speaking to specifically? Is it another pervading modality? Perhaps in the next moment, to unfold in the next moment. And that's what he does discuss in 94 to 104. And so it's important for us to understand this summary, because we're going to launch into a third pervading modality of his phenomenology. So let's go to the second moment. Let's take a look at those 10 pages. The third pervading modality consists of an eschatological temporal horizon that is discussed, posited, and discussed at the dialogue threshold. There's a backdrop to the sensory realm that contains a motivation of desiring, says Brentano, and that is acquired through his concept of Protoraices. Now, he gives a posited axiom for this third pervading modality, and his positive axiom says that sensation never occurs separated from Protoraices. Protoraices always is presumed. It's always a accompanying concept with any sensation, with any acquisition of a percept. So Protoraices provides for Brentano a modifying temporal specificity to the first two pervading modalities. So you got that first two levels. Now he's going to give us the third level of a pervading modality, which is going to be the temporal modality. But before we get into that, because he's tying it so closely to Protoraices, we need to ask exactly now, very precisely, what does he mean? And so if we look at Brentano's actual concept, it's really a compound Greek concept. It's Protoraices. Aesthesis. It's Protoraices. Protoraices. And it combines two Greek concepts, protoros, which means former, and aesthesis, which means intellectual and moral insight. So his term actually equals the self's intellectual moral stance that is already possessed by every individual as a filter through which all sensation and all dialogue takes place. We all possess kind of a motivational inward filter or tilt toward reality that we carry. It's kind of our preconceived intellectual and moral insight toward reality, that slant, that stance. And that is what he calls Protoraices. He abbreviates it down to the single term of Protoraices. He says that temporal determination as a pervading modality is found in this pervading modality. It's attached to this concept of Protoraices. So, note 5, key important note here. Protoraices enjoins the superimposed object, which is imprinted over the primary fundamental object. In other words, its attentiveness is to grasp the intentional relation that is imprinted over the primary fundamental sensory object. So at the dialogue threshold, we can employ Protoraices to acquire the past experience of intentional trajectory for any event, and therefore the task of refinement within this dimension, at this third pervading modality, the task is to mark out the degree of realization of the sensate experience with regard to its actualization of the secondary superimposed intentionality that was imprinted on it. So we are, in other words, we are addressing and refining the eschatological temporal horizon of truth for an event that has been imprinted on it as that secondary directional sense that is imprinted on the sensory sensate realm of objective reality. And that is acquired through this Protoraices. So he did want to take 10 pages, 94 to 104, to very specifically address this third pervading modality that shows up by truly keying in on his concept, which combines protorais of former and aesthesis of intellectual and moral insight. So it's the former or the previous intellectual and moral tilt or slant or filter that we carry in our perception of all objective reality. When any individual faces objective reality, you carry a conviction, you carry a way that you see the world, and it might be stored in your long-term memory. You might not call it up all the time, but if you need to call it up, you've got the entrance nodes to call it up into consciousness to use it. It's stored in your long-term memory. As a Christian, we would have in our long-term memory a model of the truth of what Christianity represents for us. We would have that actually stored in our long-term memory. If it's a specific individual we follow, like for myself, I follow Jürgen Moltmann, I have a model that represents Moltmann's position and the truth of his position, which is basically an enchained series of neurons stored in my long-term memory, and I can call that up. It's a filter through which I view all of reality, and I've called it up so many times that those neurons had fired so many times it's almost hardwired, and it will call up the entire loop of neurons no matter what entrance node I use to enter in toward that truth, toward that model. But what Brentano says is that everybody does this. It doesn't matter what your faith is, if you're whatever it is, regardless of your faith, regardless of your substrate of belief, you carry a truth model. You carry an intellectual, moral slant or tilt or stance toward reality as a kind of a window, kind of a filter through which you view all of reality. Everyone does it. He calls it a Protoraices. He calls it that Protoraices. Protoraices is his term for this individual slant or tilt of an intellectual and moral filter that every individual carries toward reality, through which we do all of our grasping of percepts, and through which we do all of our dialogue that we conduct at the dialogue threshold with others, and the refinement of truth, well, that refinement will still pass through this filter. We may revise this this stance through the dialogue threshold. As a matter of fact, it's always open to revision, so we will make minor revisions to it. So it will continually be a process that's open to revision. But it is always under consideration for Brentano. In fact, it is even a third pervading modality. So he has really laid out his program now, and he says that we pretty much have to agree that there is this third pervading modality. We have the level of fundamental sensations. We have the superimposed meaning and belief imprinted over the fundamental sensations. We also have an eschatological temporal horizon imprinted over that meaning and belief. We have three layers now, three modalities, three pervasive modalities that influence all of our percepts, our sign model, our grasping of truth, our ascent toward conceptualization, our ascent toward self-consciousness. All of those things address the three levels of the pervading modalities of our perceptive reality. It includes the fundamental sensations, the superimposed meaning and belief, and then now he says it also includes an eschatological temporal imprint, a temporal horizon, which is imprinted because of our Protoraices stance that we all possess. Everyone possesses a Protoraices enchaining of a filter in their long-term memory that they carry without exception. Regardless what your belief system is, you do have it formed into a kind of a Protoraices enchained long-term memory that you can call up, and you will always use it as either an unconscious or a conscious filter anytime you face objective reality. It's an extremely important lesson because it really keys us in on how Brentano is really developing his system, and this term Protoraices is very key to understanding Brentano. But now we can understand it in connection with and in conjunction with our 5-point summary that we opened with. And that'll wrap us up through page 104.